We are both active and healthy. We spend at least an hour at the gym several times a week. We also enjoy the outdoors and often go hiking when the weather permits. I am John Hopper. I'm 180 centimeters tall and weigh about 82 kilograms. I wouldn't say I'm some kind of super stud, but I know how to please my wife, and we make love frequently, usually about 2 or 3 times a week. Macy is about 170 centimeters tall with C-cup breasts, a flat stomach, and a pleasant curve to her hips. Overall, she is still very attractive. Heads would turn every time we went out, especially if she was dressed to impress. My children were wonderful. They were well-balanced, earned good grades, and were somewhat popular at their school. They were the greatest joy in my life, along with my lovely wife. I rarely missed one of their games or school performances. I actively participated in their extracurricular activities, helped them with homework, and took them on hikes and camping trips on weekends. As an engineering manager, I primarily delegated the actual engineering tasks to my team, so I didn't have to work overtime or on weekends. Business trips were minimal, just a conference or 2 per year. Macy occasionally had to work late when handling a big case, but it wasn't all that frequent. All right, that pretty much sums up our life. Clearly, if that were all there was, this would be a pretty boring story. Storm clouds were brewing, and I wasn't paying attention. They came in the form of a cocky young attorney hired by the law firm where my wife worked. His name was Brandon Howard. He was a big guy, standing 190 centimeters tall and weighing about 105 kilograms. He worked out a lot to relieve work stress, so he carried no extra weight. He was self-assured, brazen, and arrogant. On top of that, he was perpetually single. The first time I met him was at one of my wife's work events. He flirted with her incessantly all evening. She even flirted back a little, right in front of me. When I voiced my disapproval, she told me to grow up and insisted it was completely harmless. As soon as we got home, I tried to explain to her that, while I completely trusted her, my issue was that it was incredibly disrespectful on her part to flirt with another man right in front of her husband. I don't think she entirely agreed with me that her behavior was inappropriate, but she at least acknowledged my concerns. Another day or 2 passed before things returned to normal. Life went on for another 6 months. Macy was working on a major case that had been ongoing for about 2 years. It was finally nearing its conclusion. She started working long hours. I know what you're thinking, and no, she wasn't fooling me. It was a legitimate case, and we had discussed it thoroughly. She also called home at least once every evening to check in and make sure everything was okay. There were also several other people working late. As I later found out, although they weren't having an affair, the flirting continued and even escalated. The case was finally settled in favor of my wife's firm's client. To celebrate, one of the senior partners rented a cabin about 4 hours away in the mountains. He invited everyone who had worked on the case, along with their significant others, to spend the weekend there. I knew the partner fairly well, and we had actually been to the cabin a few times before. As I mentioned earlier, the kids were 15 and 17 years old. They were quite responsible and at an age where they could take care of themselves. We decided to leave them at home alone rather than with my wife's parents. Yes, I warned them against any bad behavior. With that decision made, Macy and I packed our bags and left on Friday afternoon. We arrived at the cabin early in the evening and took our bags to the room we were assigned. Other than having to endure Brandon flirting with my wife all evening, it was a pleasant experience. After expressing my frustration to Macy about her continued flirting with Brandon, I decided to let it go and spent some time chatting with Charles and Louise, the cabin's owners. As I mentioned before, I liked Chuck and Lou. They preferred being called that in informal settings. We had a lot of shared interests. After dinner and some time around the fire pit on the back terrace, it was already late. I took my wife to bed. Honestly, I was very tired and still a bit upset with her, so I turned away from her and fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. Macy was still sleeping beside me, so I quietly got out of bed, put on some shorts and a t-shirt, and went in search of some wake-up juice. When I entered the kitchen, I found Chuck and Lou busy preparing a hearty breakfast. Grabbing my coffee, I joined in to help. It was quite a setup, as aside from Chuck and Lou, there were two other couples, Macy and me and Brandon. George, another attorney, was there with his wife, and Katie, a paralegal, had brought her husband, James. Eventually, everyone made their way into the kitchen, just as breakfast was finishing up. By the time I grabbed my plate and headed to the table, I saw that Brandon had taken my seat next to my wife. "Excuse me, but you're sitting in my seat," I said politely. "Oh, darling," Macy replied. "We're in the middle of a conversation. Could you sit over there, please? Just this once." But dear, I was a bit busy helping out. I was really looking forward to sitting and chatting with my wife over breakfast. "It'll be fine, just this once. After all, we can talk anytime, but I rarely get the chance to chat with my colleagues outside the office." I was genuinely stunned. I decided that, in the end, I really wasn't hungry, so I took my plate and placed it back on the counter. Refilling my coffee cup, I walked out onto the back terrace and sat alone. Reflecting on what had just happened, I recalled the expressions on the faces of several others during the exchange. Something was going on, and I had a distinct feeling that I wouldn't be happy with the outcome. As the day went on, things didn't improve. Macy spent most of her time near Brandon. The only moments she really spent with me were when we were both socializing with other people. When we went hiking, she walked with Brandon. When we went swimming in the lake, she spent her time with Brandon. A few times, I managed to remind her that she was my wife, not Brandon's girlfriend. She just laughed it off and said I was letting my imagination run wild. By the time dinner was over, I had had enough. When we stepped onto the terrace to enjoy the evening and have some drinks, I timed it perfectly. My wife had just sat down, and as Brandon moved to sit next to her, I slid in and bumped him aside with my hip as I took the seat myself. Macy was not pleased. She shot me one of her irritated looks. I just smiled back and took her hand. She tried to pull it away, but I only tightened my grip, refusing to let go. In response, she practically stopped talking to me. It was a rather uncomfortable couple of hours as everyone else seemed to pick up on the tension. I had finally had enough. The weekend had turned into a complete disaster. I excused myself, explaining that I was tired from the day's activities, and got up to head to bed. On my way, I stopped in the kitchen to refresh my drink. My plan was to pack up our things before going to sleep so I wouldn't feel rushed the next morning before heading home. I had just screwed the cap back on the bourbon bottle when Macy walked in. "John, I need to talk to you for a minute before you go to bed." "Well, Macy, I'm somewhat surprised by this. We had the entire day to talk, but you chose to speak with everyone except me. In fact, you've been talking to Brandon almost non-stop, but have barely said a word to your husband." At least she had the decency to blush. "Yes, well, you see, I need to explain this. This should be interesting. First of all, I need you to understand that I have never cheated on you. Never. Based on how you've been acting this weekend, I'm not so sure about that. It's true. Look, Brandon and I may have flirted a little, but that's it. He hasn't even really touched me other than helping me over a few obstacles during today's hike. Now, as I've said, I've been completely faithful to you, and the thought of cheating on you has never even crossed my mind. But there are no buts. That's why I'm here talking to you. I have to admit, there's a pretty strong attraction between Brandon and me. The flirting we've been doing has created some tension. That's why I need to tell you that I'm going to spend the night with him. I had to let you know and be upfront about it, so it wouldn't be cheating. I'm not going to go behind your back." "No." "What?" I said no. I'm not going to allow this. Listen, I've already made up my mind about this. There's just so much tension between us that I have to do this and see what it's all about. It's just this one time, and then, when we go home tomorrow, I'll be all yours again. Let me make this perfectly clear. I will not accept this. I will not approve of this. If you go through with it, there will be terrible consequences. I'm not going to get behind it. Baby, if you really love me, you'll let me do this just once. Baby, if you really loved me, you wouldn't even ask for this. Hell, you wouldn't even think about it. John, I really need to do this. It's just one time. And then I'll come back and be completely faithful to you again. Macy, do you remember our wedding vows, especially the part about forsaking all others? Furthermore, since you feel the need to break that vow, which you willingly made before God, as well as all our friends and family, why should I trust this quiet promise you're making now, with no witnesses? All right, John, I can see you're upset about this right now. I really need to do it, so I'll see you in the morning. We can talk about it tomorrow on the way home. With that, she turned and walked back outside. Just like that, 20 years of a happy marriage were flushed down the toilet. She expected me to be the loyal husband waiting for her to fly back into my open arms the next morning. That's not how I operate. We discussed this many times. Several of our friends had cheated on their spouses, and we had talked about it. We had no whole passes for infidelity. Cheating was a deal breaker, and I didn't care if she told me about it first. Cheating isn't just sneaking around behind someone's back. The act of being with someone else is, in and of itself, infidelity. I poured my drink down the sink. I didn't need another one for what I was about to do. I went upstairs and packed all my things. I left Macy's stuff as it was. She could take care of her own mess. Turning off the light in the room, I sat on the bed and waited. An hour passed before I heard everyone return to the house and head to their rooms. I waited another half an hour to ensure everyone was either asleep or occupied with something else. Grabbing my bag, I quietly left the room and closed the door. I managed to get outside almost silently. Thankfully, my car was parked the farthest away. It was a relatively new car, so when I started it and drove off, it made little noise. It was just after 2 a.m. when I pulled up to our house. I noticed the lights were on, which meant at least one of the kids was still awake. Sighing, I stepped out, grabbed my bag, and walked inside. Sure enough, both kids were up watching a movie. "Hey, Dad, what are you doing here?" "I didn't think you'd be back until tomorrow," Darcy remarked. "Yeah, and where's Mom?" David added. Well, by answering David's question, I can answer both. Your mother is still at the cabin, in her partner's bed. Yes, I'm a jerk for dragging our kids into the personal issues between their mom and me, but I thought being honest with them would prepare them for the changes ahead. Okay, maybe I could have handled it more diplomatically, but in that moment, I didn't feel particularly remorseful. What do you mean, in her partner's bed? Is Mom really seeing someone else? Darcy nearly shouted. That's exactly what I meant. She cornered me this evening and told me she was going to sleep with someone else tonight. I decided I didn't want to stick around for that, so I packed my things and came home. I let her partner figure out how to get her home. I didn't think I needed to wait around nearby for her. We talked a little more before I took my bag to the spare room. I spent the next hour moving all my things from the room we used to share into what would now be my room. Thankfully, the guest room was a second master bedroom with its own bathroom. The bed was also pretty comfortable. Once I was settled, I collapsed onto the bed and fell into an exhausted sleep. I woke up a few hours later to the sound of my phone ringing. Looking at it, I noticed it was my wife calling. I sent it to voicemail. Taking a closer look, I saw that she had left half a dozen text messages, and this was her third call. Out of curiosity, I read the messages and listened to the voicemails. The earlier ones were curious, asking where I was and mentioning that breakfast was almost ready. Then they turned worried, asking where I had gone. The later ones were angry, demanding to know where I was and ordering me to get back there to pick her up and drive her home. The final message informed me that she had to ask someone else for a ride and that she was going to confront me as soon as she got home. Well, I was already awake, so I figured I might as well get up and prepare for the day ahead. Hurricane Macy was set to arrive in about 4 hours, and I needed to brace myself for the storm. I had a feeling she was going to be furious. There wasn't a hint of remorse in her final message. I got up, took a shower, got dressed, and headed downstairs to have breakfast. By the time I finished eating, the kids were already up. They explained to them that they might want to steer clear of the crossfire since their mother was not in a very good mood. Surprisingly, they just laughed at that. I had a bad feeling about what would happen when she got home, but they didn't seem too pleased with what she had done either. "Where have you been, you jerk?" The slamming door announced the arrival of misbehavior. Sorry, I couldn't resist. She threw me a pitch so low and perfect, I just had to knock it out of the park. "Well, darling, according to my anatomical map, your backside should be somewhere between your hips. Did Brandon have trouble finding it last night? I honestly didn't think a human face could turn that deep a shade of red. Whoops, sorry, now it's turning purple. I was just about to pull out my phone to call an ambulance in case she had a stroke when the explosion came. What were you thinking, leaving me there like that? Do you have any idea how embarrassing it was for me this morning when everyone found out you left, and I had to ask for a ride home? You fool. I was going to invite you to bed today. But now you can forget about that." I just smiled back at her. Honestly, I was impressed by the self-control I was managing to display toward her. "First of all, dear, I couldn't care less how embarrassing you think this is. Trust me, it's nowhere near as embarrassing as it was for me when you jumped into bed with that person, and everyone knew about it. Second, I have absolutely no interest in ever being intimate with you again. You're damaged now. Do you really think I'd put myself back into your situation after you've turned it into a difficult place? How can you talk to me like that? I'm your wife." "No, you're not." "Well, maybe on paper you still are, but the truth is, my wife disappeared somewhere yesterday. You're just a partner now." "What are you talking about?" "We discussed this last night. I told you about it beforehand, so it wasn't cheating." "All right, let me ask you a couple of questions. First, last night, did you spend time with someone who wasn't your husband?" "Yes, I told you I was going to spend the night with Brandon." "Second, did you let him spend time with you?" "Of course I did. Why else would I have gone to bed with him?" "All right then. Since you let someone other than your husband spend time with you, you crossed a line. End of story. It doesn't matter whether you told me about it or not. In fact, you didn't even ask. You said you had already made your decision, and that I didn't have a say in it. I even told you not to do it. I said I was absolutely against it. You just went ahead and did it anyway. But if you really love me, you'll let this go. If you truly love me, we can get past this. You foolish woman. If you really loved me, you would have never even thought about being with that person." With that, I turned and headed to the garage to work on my 1969 Nova. Originally, it came with a standard 6-cylinder engine and a 3-speed manual transmission. I had swapped the engine for a small block, and the transmission was now a 4-speed. Yeah, I know that plenty of new gearheads go the rest of the route, installing newer computer-controlled engines. Sure, they get more power and better fuel efficiency. But I'm old school. I hate all that computer-controlled stuff. You need a tech genius just to keep the thing running. With an old engine, I can wrench on it, wire it up, and it'll run smoothly. You install it, wire it up, set up the computer controller, then haul it somewhere else, and pay a guy another $1,000 to tune it before you can even start it. No thanks. Over the next few months, Macy tried to get me to talk to her. I wasn't interested. She also tried sneaking into my room late at night a few times. I had changed the locks and she didn't have a key. As far as I was concerned, we were now just platonic housemates who happened to share 2 kids. Why didn't I just divorce her? The kids. I didn't want to be a part-time dad. I loved my kids and wanted to be there for them. Besides, there were only 3 years left before David graduated and went off to college. Macy tried involving the kids to force me to talk to her. That didn't go well. The kids were seriously upset about what she had done. She even tried confronting me and twisting things to turn them against me. Darcy set her straight. "Mom, Dad has never said a bad word about you to us. You, on the other hand, have complained about him to us several times. Don't blame Dad for turning us against you. You did that all by yourself." Yes, there were some tough times in the Hopper household. 4 months later, Macy started wearing very little around the house when the kids weren't home. She began putting on very seductive clothing, trying to lure me into her bed or into mine. Whatever worked for her. I have to admit, sometimes it was hard to resist. After all, she's a very attractive woman. Still, I was resolute. I just couldn't get past her betrayal. 6 months had passed since that night. "I can't take this anymore, John," she said, dressed in a sheer black nightgown. "I need you. It's been 6 months since we last had intimacy. I need you to come to bed and be with me. Why don't you go to your partner and ask him to do it?" "I don't have another partner, John. I haven't been intimate since that night at the cabin. Now I need you, and if you refuse to fulfill your marital duties, I'll have to go out and find someone else who will do your job." Well, that was an ultimatum. I looked at her and said, "Just don't bring them here. I won't tolerate you bringing any of your partners into my house. Go to their place, a motel, or even the back seat of their car, but don't bring them here." A crushed expression crossed her face, and then she turned and ran out of the room, sobbing. "Choices have consequences. I don't want anyone else. I just want you." I heard her sobbing as she ran out of the room. You might be wondering why I didn't take the opportunity to just be with her. After all, she's a very beautiful woman, and it had been 6 months since I last was with her. Well, that's true, and I was tempted. The problem was that I just couldn't get past the fact that she had willingly humiliated me in front of her colleagues. Every time I tried to think about being close with her, all I could picture was her colleagues laughing at me while she was with someone else. I had lost all desire for her. Sure, she was beautiful on the outside, but all I could see was the ugliness inside her. It was a week later, on a Saturday evening. I was relaxing in the living room, sipping a scotch and soda while reading a book. Macy came down the stairs and stood in front of me. She was wearing tight jeans, stockings, 12 centimeters heels, and her expensive jewelry. Her hair and makeup were flawless. She looked like she was ready to attend one of the most glamorous holiday parties we used to go to together. "John, I need you. I want you. I'm begging you. Please, take me upstairs and be with me. I can't take this anymore, so if you're not going to have me, I'll go find someone who will. I told you last week that I would do this if you refused. This is your last chance. Please don't make me walk out that door." "You look very nice," I replied. "I have no doubt you'll find someone to spend the night with. Just be prepared, because if you are with someone else, I will take it as your permission for me to do the same. If you walk out that door and are with another person, I'll consider it an open marriage where we're both free to be with whoever we want." "Damn it, John. This isn't what I want. I'm willingly offering myself to you, but you keep rejecting me. I don't want to be with other people. I'm sure I don't want you to be with other women. You're driving me to this. It's not the same. If you don't want me anymore, why don't you just divorce me? Is that what you want? Do you want me to divorce you? Hell no. I want you to take me back as your devoted wife again. You weren't very devoted to me at the cabin, so why should I expect you to be devoted now? Because I promised I would be. And just over 20 years ago, you vowed to be the same. What makes you think I'd believe any of your promises now? Fine. If that's how it's going to be, then don't wait. All right. If that's your choice, I'll start making arrangements with a couple of women who've shown quite a bit of interest in me. You're the one forcing this. If you go and be with another woman, I'll divorce you so fast you won't know what hit you. I'll get the house, the kids, and more than half the assets. You'll end up in a 1-bedroom apartment, living on instant meals because of all the support you'll have to pay. Then, just to spite you, I'll make your visitation rights a nightmare. Yeah, good luck with that. You do realize the kids are old enough to decide which parent they want to live with, right? Want to bet on who they'll choose? Go ahead. Go out and have your fun. I honestly don't care." She started crying again. "What do you want from me? How long are you going to punish me? What can I do to make you love me again?" She sobbed. "There's absolutely nothing you can do. You already did it. It's done. You were with another person and humiliated me in front of your friends. As for what I want from you, I want to coexist in this house as roommates for the next 3 years. Once David turns 18, graduates high school, and goes off to college, we'll get divorced and go our separate ways. Until then, we'll live in the same house and raise our kids together. If you want to divorce me before that, go ahead. I can't stop you. Just keep in mind that the kids will most likely choose to live with me. That means I'll stay here in the house, and you'll be paying support. Macy, I just can't trust you anymore. I can't live with the thought that my partner might be with someone else every time she's not at home. I can't live with the thought of when the next time might be that you break your promise to stay faithful. I see only 2 options here. The first is to divorce you now, and the kids end up with 2 part-time parents. The other option is to live in the same house where we both have freedom, but the kids get to live with 2 parents under one roof. We'll share the house but be divorced in every sense except on paper. You'll be free to date as much as you want, and so will I. We just won't bring anyone home." She did go out that evening after freshening up and putting on makeup. As promised, I also started dating other women. Within a month, she seemed to accept her new reality. We were polite to each other and essentially lived as platonic roommates while raising the kids. We acted like a family. If one of us had a party to attend, we usually went together to keep up appearances in public. Of course, it didn't take long for our colleagues to figure out what was going on. Hell, I was dating a few single women in my office, and she was seeing a couple of guys from her workplace. Yes, she kept trying to lure me back into her bed, but I mostly resisted. Okay, sure, there were a couple of times when I gave in. She was still a beautiful woman, and after a few drinks, I let my little head make the decisions. I always used protection with her, and it was just intimacy, not love. "So this is it," Macy said, tears in her eyes. "This is it," I replied, loading another box into my truck. "Thank you for 23 wonderful years, Macy." "I know." "Yeah." Tears welled up in her eyes again. It had been just over 3 years. David had recently moved into his dorm for college, and Darcy was about to start her freshman year at university. The house had been sold, and we were packing up our belongings to move out. We were going our separate ways. The divorce process was already underway, and we were just waiting for the final decree. Our assets had been split 50-50. The kids' college accounts were already fully funded. "I still love you, you know," she whispered. "I know. I'm sorry." "Me too." She turned to look at me, tears streaming down her cheeks. Will you call me sometimes? Come by occasionally. Maybe we can see each other now and then. Please, no obligations, just to see each other." My hatred for what she had done had long since faded. I no longer felt the love I once had, but I didn't despise her either. In truth, I saw her as something of a friend. Besides, we were still connected through the kids, and honestly, she was very good in bed. Sure, we can do that. Plus, there will be the kids' birthdays, graduations, weddings, and the births of grandchildren where we'll both be present. The kids forgave Macy for what she had done. Their relationship improved, but it never quite returned to what it once was. Macy bought a small 3-bedroom apartment so the kids could visit her when they were in town. I bought a modest house with a couple of acres of land and a workshop. It was a small town, so we still bumped into each other from time to time. I called her, and she called me. We even went out together a few times. No, there was never a chance of us getting back together, although she did try. We both dated fairly often. She eventually had a few long-term relationships. I was content just being single. I decided I was done with exclusivity. For me, there were only two reasons to be married. The first was to have and raise children. I'd already done that, and was too old to do it again. The other reason was to grow old together and have a companion in later years. That honestly didn't matter much to me. I had plenty of friends and family if I ever felt lonely. John, I have a very big favor to ask of you. I'll understand if you don't want to do it, but I'd really like you to at least think about it. We were having lunch at a nice restaurant. It had been 5 years since the divorce. Go ahead and ask. I figured you needed something when you invited me to lunch today. By the way, where's your boyfriend? Won't he be jealous that you invited your ex-husband to lunch? She smiled. No, he knows all about our past. He knows there's nothing to worry about. Besides, it was actually his idea for me to ask you privately. He thought it might be more awkward if you were here. However, he's ready to take your call if you'd like to confirm that he's okay with this request. All right, you've piqued my interest. John, Martin proposed to me, and I said yes. Good. Do you love him? Have you finally moved on from us? I'll never completely forget about us, John, but I've come to terms with it. As for Martin, I'm comfortable with him. I do love him, and we're really good together. I've settled down and plan to spend the rest of my life with him. All right. So what is it you want to ask? If it's my blessing, you have it. Although honestly, you don't need it. I don't have a say in this. No, well, I think that's part of it. But what I really want is for you to walk me down the aisle and give me away at the wedding. Wait, where did that truck come from? Let's talk about something unrelated. My mind just exploded. Oh, what? I want you to walk me down the aisle and give me away at my wedding. Most ex-wives don't even want their ex-husbands at their new weddings, let alone having them participate in the ceremony. Yes, I'm aware of that. Then why, for the love of all that's holy, do you think this is a good idea? All right, hear me out. I've obviously talked about this with Martin, and he's okay with it. I just sat there, stunned, as she explained her reasoning. After listening to her, I had to admit there was some logic to it in a really strange way. John, you were the most significant man in my life, aside from my father. As you know, he's no longer with us. Moreover, you were my last significant relationship. I could ask David to give me away, but it just feels wrong for my son to give his mother away. It's like I belong to my son, and I just think that sounds a little strange. Instead, my heart belonged to you for most of my adult life. You were the last man to truly hold a part of me, Martin, and I think it would be fitting for the last man who held my heart to give it to the new man. After all, even if you still hold a piece of my heart, it's clear you don't necessarily want to keep it. This would be a wonderful way to show that you're letting it go and passing it on to someone else who will care for it and protect it. I believe the symbolism of it would show that we're still friends, but that our love is completely over, and my new husband is now taking that place. Yes, it sounded crazy to me too. I actually called Martin. I even met with him that evening for a few drinks at a local bar. He liked the idea. Of course, he was skeptical when Macy first brought it up, but after hearing her reasoning and discussing it thoroughly, he came around to it. I still wasn't convinced. It just felt like there was too much weirdness involved. I also called my kids to get their opinions on the matter. Who gives this woman away? Her family and her ex-husband do. Yeah, that just sounded wrong on so many levels, but it's what she wanted. I have to admit, it seemed to work. I was passing the baton to her new man. I really felt like our relationship had finally come to an end, and her new one had fully begun. Of course, there were a few comments, but overall, it was received positively. It certainly made the reception quite entertaining. A few women even approached me, asking if I was interested in starting something new now that I had officially closed the door on my past. I think there might be 3 or 4 among them who are ready to take a shot at me. We'll see. At the very least, My weekends over the next month or two won't be boring. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.